Dr. Marlene Attzs, UWI-based Economist. Commander Garvin Heerah, Strategic Security Consultant and Organisational Transformation Expert. Mr. Rajiv Diptee, President of the Supermarket Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Christian Rampersad, President of the Arima Business Association. Dr. Rishi Sharma, President of the Rotary Club of St. Augustine. Directors of the Arima Business Association, Rotary Club of St. Augustine, the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and the Supermarket Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Melissa Senhouse, President of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and a Rotarian in the Rotary Club of St. Augustine. On behalf of the organizing associations, I wish to welcome you to our annual post-budget forum. The four host organizations share similar socio-economic issues, which have created the impetus for a collaborative forum. It is with this recognition that we saw the importance of presenting a panel of respected speakers to dissect the budget and discuss possible concerns and opportunities to help us as business owners and professionals survive this pandemic. In a survey conducted by Lucent Research Limited on behalf of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce in August 2021, 77% of respondent businesses in the Greater Tunapuna area and environs reported low customer traffic and sales, and 42% of businesses were not confident about post-pandemic recovery. As such, the main objective of business owners currently is to survive. One, to survive the virus, and two, to survive the challenging economic climate. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted every industry in every country. And one of the main pathways forward is digital transformation. In this regard, we are happy to see the government's continued thrust towards digital transformation and ease of doing business. The total removal of taxes pertaining to computer hardware, software, and peripherals would contribute positively to digitization. However, this would be of little value unless government's current speed of digital transformation is not increased, thus removing stagnated processes which continue to exist. We appreciate the government's recognition of the additional challenges faced by businesses, especially the micro, small, and medium enterprises. These challenges were confirmed by the responses that business owners provided in the Chamber's survey that focused on the financial health and survivability of businesses. Therefore, the measures that were announced in the Minister of Finance presentation in an effort to create easier access to the SME loan, establishing an easier payment regimen, and the creation of a program by which the MSMEs can create structure, which in turn promotes business continuity, are welcomed. Our esteemed panelists would elaborate further in what can be anticipated to be a very informative session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Mr. Jason Williams. Jason Williams, or JW, has a background of over 20 years in media, having started in 1997 on TTT and then switching to radio in 1998. He has also hosted live events such as School Soca Monarch, Party, Club, and cultural events. JW was co-host for the television program series E-Zone and freelance as a presenter for Synergy TV. In 2010, together with Ansel Blaze Isaac, they won the Soca Monarch and Road March titles. JW joined CNC's 3, The Morning Brew, in September 2021. I now introduce Jason Williams. JW.
Thank you, President Senhouse. And of course, it's indeed a true honor to be here. And I want to personally thank everyone associated with the Arima Business Association, the Rotary Club of St. Augustine, the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and the Supermarket Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Indeed, a very warm welcome there from President Senhouse. And indeed, being here, as always, it's very important to partake in such discussions and to soak in the information and to listen to leading personalities and voices within the space. Now, yesterday, a $52 billion budget was presented by the Minister of Finance. Resilience in the face of the global pandemic was the theme. Now, we beg to ask the question, is this truly the case? And I know that during the course of our virtual session, we will have honest, insightful, and really profound and vigorous discussions from our various presenters. So without any further delay, let me introduce you to our presenters one by one. And of course, we encourage all those within the space to put forward your questions. We will have the question and answer segment to the very end. And by all means, feel free to share your thoughts so that we could have as much interaction as possible. Let me welcome Commander Garvin Heerah. Now, Commander Heerah has continued his dedicated service and support the country and is an advocate for meaningful contributions to sustainable development. He has been highly recommended by the Anglia Ruskin University in the UK to pursue his doctorate in business administration. He has accepted and has considered reading sincere apologies there. Commander Heerah has accepted and considered reading for his doctors in business administration this year. And Commander Heerah has a passion for leadership and the dynamics of strategic management. He twins his academic prowess with his experience in senior corporate governance and regional government. He continues to write and research on varied topics, and his submissions, of course, on various platforms, always goes forward with the quote, to ensure that we as a society and a citizenry can contribute to the sustainable development of our nation and region. Of course, retired Commander Garvin Heerah is and has been a believer in his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for the past 24 years. He is married to Lorraine Heerah and the proud father of 3 lovely children. Commander, can you just come in and give us a quick wave and say a quick good evening? Commander?
Thank you very much, JW, and thank you again to the esteemed executive team for putting this discussion together this evening, and to my fellow panelists. Thanks again, JW.
Indeed. We move on now to Dr. Marlene Attzs. Dr. Attzs is a lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Attzs currently serves as an administrative capacity at the University of the West Indies in Augustine, and uses her academic skills and competencies to support the university's strategic objectives. With more than 20 years experience as an economist, focusing primarily on the economics of sustainable development, Dr. Attzs has worked with regional and international organizations such as the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, and the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP. She's a regular public commentator on national, social, and economic matters. Dr. Attzs, warm welcome to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Indeed. We take it now to a man who, for those who tune into local television and review all what's happening in the local scene, no stranger to that space, and he's coming on today in his capacity as president of the Supermarket Association, an accomplished businessman, a registered pharmacist, of course, both an undergraduate degree in business management and a Bachelor of Sciences degree in pharmacy from the University of the West Indies. It gives me great pleasure to welcome entrepreneur, a man who takes great stride in being at the helm there at the Supermarket Association, and a man who's recognized for his work, non-governmental organizations in the country, and giving back to those who are in need. Let's give a warm welcome to Rajiv. Diptee.
Thank you. Thank you, JW, for that intro. And thank you to all the organizers of this panel, and a special good night to my colleagues on the panel. Thank you.
And finally, we welcome a man who comes with international corporate experience, with a high record of achievement in complex business transformations, and has senior corporate positions both locally and internationally, including John Dickinson Limited and Augustine Industries. He was European General Manager of Thomas Cook Europe, where he was responsible for launching the world's first interactive website for the purchase of foreign exchange. Head of Global Marketing Gulf Oil, where he was responsible for the marketing functions of 55 nations. A former politician and still very much involved in the space, he started his political career in 2007 when he became the Member of Parliament for St. Augustine. He is a chartered accountant by profession, holds a master's degree in law, specializing in intellectual property rights, and a master's degree in business administration, specializing in international marketing. He served on the government level as Minister of Food Production, Land and Marine Affairs from 2010 to 2012. He was also the Minister of Trade, Industry and Investment, and the Minister of Communications, and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance between 2012 to 2015. Without any delay, we welcome to the forum Mr. Vasant Bharath. Mr. Bharath, could unmute just to make sure we inside.
Right. Good evening, JW. Good evening to my fellow panelists, and good evening to everyone who's listening. I'm hopeful that we can pick some sense out of the nonsense and work our way through the maze of the budget, and hopefully bring some sense of relief in terms of what's available to the population after this discussion.
Indeed. There were so many moving parts yesterday, and we want to start just like with the introductions. I want to welcome Commander Garvin Heerah to give us his perspective, give us his insight coming out of yesterday's budget presented by the Finance Minister. Commander Heerah, it's all yours.
Thank you, JW. And again, thanks again, team. I echo the sentiments of each member of the panelists on being thankful for being considered for the discussions this afternoon. I remember having some conversations with the organizing team, and we were kind of bouncing around as to this afternoon regarding presentation, statistics, charts, and that type of stuff. And it was agreed from the team that what we are having this evening is that combination, and I think Mr. Bharath said it nicely, that combination that can engage in a meaningful discussion to bring about some semblance of sense and make some sense out of what has been said yesterday, and articulate that forward in our communication so that Citizen X, Trinidad and Tobago will get a grasp and an understanding of what was said yesterday. But the question that needs to be answered, how does it affect me? I'm thankful for being included in this esteemed panel and to speak with regard to national security, crime, security, safety. $5.664 billion allocated to national security. I would not go down the road of maybe doing too much of an in-depth comparative analysis as to what has been happening over the last couple of years, as to what happened this year, and then doing that sort of re-show and looking forward. Our economists, who are quite esteemed and versed in the field, are going to take us through that walk. What is necessary, and I've said it in different forums, that has to be understood, that we need to take a grasp of in our first stride going forward in this whole analytical conversation this evening, is the elephant in the room, which is COVID-19. And therefore, we cannot face this allocation to national security as just another allocation, spending, expenditure, how we're going to spend the money for projects and that type of stuff. This has to be a shift in the narrative. And I'm hoping, as a subject matter expert, expressing my views here this evening on what was said and how we move forward, that somewhere in the background, a team is shifting that narrative. So it cannot be a project-centered approach to the allocation from Ministry of National Security for this specific fiscal year. What it has to happen, it has to be a people-centered. Because what we have seen over the years is that a lot of funding and monies and contracts are pumped into mega projects. And I'm not dismissing the mega projects here this evening. I'm not dismissing the fact that we need to also look at some of the big ticket items that is needed in national security. What we have to zero in on is those people who we have considered and branded essential workers. Those people who have always been the frontliners. Those people who within the last 19 months have actually taken it on their shoulders and ran under high-risk environments, ran under extreme and hazardous conditions, and has been able to contribute towards maintaining some aspect of safety and security, a semblance of law and order for Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, we are hoping, myself, my team, some of the people that are looking on, that national security would be able to utilize and pay attention to the people that are national security, those who are within the corridors of the public service of national security, and those who are also frontliners in the operational sense. Because vehicles won't drive themselves, ships won't sail themselves, aircraft won't sail themselves, operation centers won't man themselves, prisons systems wouldn't protect themselves or operate in that condition, nor would fire appliances or immigration and all the other key elements of national security. There are three key pillars within this conversation. And the three pillars are health, training, and housing. So it is expected that the planners would be focusing on the people-centered value systems that addresses the health of our essential workers, the frontliners, the national security people, the NSP, the training element for these people, and of course, housing, which is a big one. And we will take the opportunity in the question and answer segment to get deeper into that and to be a little more granular in how we present some of the necessities that are there and that are needed at the front of what I call the low-hanging fruit. Now, what we'll have to understand is there's a lot of talk about investment. There was a lot of talk about foreign exchange and the involvement and the attractions of investment for Trinidad and Tobago. But if you cannot present a safe and secure country, then there will be a deterrent to investment. And one of the key issues coming out of that would be, are our people who are the performers, the agents in national security, in a position to ensure that we are protecting and providing that safety and security for the whole of Trinidad and Tobago? Can they go into their tasks comfortable? Has the budget, has the allocations, have now the teams and the planners taken that as a priority item so that people can be comfortable in order to perform their tasks? One of the key issues that we cannot afford to dismiss is that in 2020, Trinidad dropped in its corruption index to number 86. And therefore, corruption and fraud remains a front burner in some of the issues regarding investment and foreign investment. Am I going to be comfortable coming into a country and investing in a country with its corruption index at 84, a correction at 86? So having said that, we now shift the conversation a little bit to address some of the issues that we heard about, digitization, for instance. With digitization, it's an applaudable fact. Okay, we want to be technologically driven. There was talk about systems integration and a whole of government approach, yes. But a major part of that also comes training and preparation and readiness and criteria for the right type of people within national security. Because it's easy to pronounce with the buzzwords, the digitization, that's the buzzword now. And we're going forward, and everybody's talking it. But perfecting a sort of subject matter expert approach to the digitization comes also with the aspect of the right people for the job. And within the system of national security, we have a number of trained people. But right now, these same people, they have issues. They will be putting on their uniforms and representing their brand and their reputation of their units and their organizations and their agencies. But these same people, when they take off their uniforms, have to face utility bills, have to face the property tax which is lurking in the background, have to deal with issues of fuel subsidies and stuff at the pump, have to also deal with loans and housing and sending their children to school or sending their children online to school and dealing with issues of those social aspects. Are we ensuring and prioritizing our NSPs, our national security persons, so that they can be taken care of in order to perform in their roles, be it digitization, be it the anti-corruption issues that we talked about, or even in the operational realm, so that Trinidad and Tobago can be a safe place? And those are some of the concerns that needs to be taken as the new norm. We've talked about the new norm. That's why I'm saying the shift has to be people-centered, taking care of the national security people. That has to be our focus going forward. Now, this afternoon, we are privileged to be part of the esteemed group and the Supermarkets Association, for instance, the Arima Business Association and the Greater Tunapuna Business Association, they're all part of the team, and the Rotary Club. Now, we are probably going to have to look at some sort of amalgamation, probably from the corporate sector or groups and associations, as I just alluded to, that are willing to work and to support national security, so that the Ministry of National Security needs to be involved in a partnership. We heard about the PPP approach, the minister spoke about that. National security strategists and stakeholder relation experts will have to be getting themselves involved with corporate Trinidad and Tobago and securing relationships and partnerships for the benefit and the purpose of supporting and satisfying the social aspect of the people of national security. So the $5.6 billion can be spent, but has to be spent smartly. Now, a major chunk of that is going to the TTPS. A major chunk of that is also going to recurring expenses. We saw in a comparative from 2021 into 2022, where there was a talk about CCTVs, acquisition of assets, infrastructure development, and a number of other stuff. Corruption and white-collar crime, a big one. And the alignment towards the financial intelligence unit of the Ministry of Finance. We didn't hear anything much in the 2022 about it. So our concerns are, is it that we have to look over a 2 or 3 year development to see the effects of what was said in 2021? Our issue here is the implementation. We are very good at diagnostics, finding out what are the issues, interventions, seeing what's working and what's not working, and then implementation and rollout comes along and we drop the ball. When it comes to implementation, we are again talking about a big people issue. And therefore, if our people are not in a mode of operation or comfortable enough to go into these implementations and these rollouts and taking a plan from manual into action, we will not achieve our objectives. And therefore, it brings me to the salient point of promoting a project governance approach for Ministry of National Security. And in that project governance approach, the key pillar that surfaces is accountability. If you have identified certain projects and a certain amount of money have been allocated towards those projects, and there are stipulated timelines to achieve these objectives, and you do not achieve these objectives and monies are spent, then somebody has to be held accountable. So yes, we can talk about the 2021 short list or short, medium, long-term list of what was supposed to have been achieved. We now have to measure the achievables and to hold people accountable whether these objectives were achieved or not. I don't want to stay too long because I want to leave that introduction to entertain and embrace Q&As that will bring out more information.
Indeed.
One of the key things that the minister said today was that he likes to listen to the third party. In the TTMA review, he said that. He listens to the third party, not so much the institution and not so much the people who are speaking from the institution. So therefore, I'm hoping that that sort of approach is transitioned to the present Minister of National Security, of what the Minister of Finance said, so that he can listen to the third parties, listen to the people on the ground and hear what are their needs. Because if the people of national security are not supported, are not satisfied based on this 5.664 and how it's going to be spent, then we are going to have people issues that is going to affect project issues, and we will not achieve our objectives.
Commander.
Oh, yes.
No, I just want to tell you, indeed, great opening, because you've identified some very solid points there. It's time to shift the narrative. You would have mentioned implementation seems to still be an issue all these years onwards. And we will find ways as we get into the questions and answers and suggestions and recommendations to arrest the dysfunction. Commander, I want to thank you for opening up, getting the ball rolling. I want you to stick around because we're going to bring some other speakers from the panel on. And later on, for sure, we will look forward to some more of your conduct in the discussion. Yes, indeed. Commander Heerah giving us the perspective from the national security side of things. Let's move now to the figures, to the economics, as we welcome from the University of the West Indies, Dr. Marlene Attzs, to shed some light as we go through our post-budget session. Dr. Attzs, it's all yours.
Thank you again. A very good afternoon to all of the panelists, to all of the organizers. I want to thank the Greater Tunapuna Chamber for inviting me to participate this afternoon. When I received the call, I felt I couldn't say no. It's been a bit of a hectic 2 weeks for me, but I felt I couldn't say no because I consider myself I was trying to figure out what's the adjective, Tunapunian. I consider myself a Tunapunian, even though I'm originally from San Fernando, but I have lived in Tunapuna for a couple of decades. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity. So I just want to share some thoughts with you, contribution to the conversation this afternoon. And Commander Heerah started essentially talking my kind of language, people-centered. And that was actually the first title that I was playing around with because I have some other engagements, but I decided to go with what I call navigating a COVID-adjusted local economy in the context of Budget 2022. So the conversation really, for me, is increasingly, I am less concerned with the numbers. I mean, the numbers are themselves indicators, but I know since we have a former government minister among us, I don't want to get into the details of what the numbers actually say and how those things are rolled out. And why I said that Commander Heerah started and essentially echoed my feeling on this matter is that it's really about people. What does the budget say to us as people? And I think that is where I want to begin the conversation in terms of that deep understanding. So the arithmetic, the economics 101 of Budget 2022, our economic structure remains the same. We continue to depend very heavily on the energy sector, which is not in the best. I mean, there's been an uptick in terms of energy prices, oil and gas prices, but there has been a pendulum shift globally. I mean, climate change, Paris agreements, etc. The fact that there is a new sheriff in town in the United States of America, and the United States is very keen, the Biden administration is very keen on non-renewable sources of energy, more environmentally friendly. So countries like ours need to understand that while we are dependent on the traditional sources of energy, the non-renewable sources, President Biden and the rest of the world is moving towards the renewable sides, the green economy, so to speak. So there are implications for us in that regard. Our government continues to spend more than it earns. Our national debt is increasing. Our foreign reserves are being depleted. The Minister of Finance yesterday announced that we have 8 months cover, just about $7 billion we have. But those reserves have been supplemented recently by a gift, quote unquote, from the International Monetary Fund as part of its global response to COVID-19, the International Monetary Fund, the much maligned International Monetary Fund, essentially decided to divvy up some spoils. It was a once-in-a-lifetime decision taken by the directors of the IMF to essentially issue these things that we call special drawing rights, but they really are for budgetary support in terms of the balance of payments. And we can get into that, but it's not important. But Trinidad and Tobago's foreign reserves have been supplemented by this gift of $644 million from the IMF's general allocations, which is what is resulting in a fairly healthy, a return to a fairly healthy foreign reserve position for Trinidad and Tobago. Our global competitiveness is deteriorating, including our ease of doing business. And Commander Heerah spoke about the ease of doing business from the crime perspective. I think one of the things that I want us to bear in mind is that while there were lots of sweeteners in yesterday's budget, and we can get into that granularity, but it's really not the focus of my presentation today, there were lots of sweeteners for foreign direct investment because while the government realizes that it can't do it alone, we need to get the country back to some COVID-adjusted normal state, and part of that is in terms of foreign direct investment. But Commander Heerah was absolutely right. There is this thing called the ease of doing business. So barring all of the bureaucratic processes, barring all of the clogged arteries, barring all of the inefficiencies in our public system, there is something called crime. And people really don't want to know that they come into a system to invest. And that pain point of crime is something that they have to deal with. Some more about the arithmetic of budget 2022, revenue of $43.3 billion, and the various sources of that revenue, oil, non-oil, et cetera, et cetera. Expenditure, we continue to spend more than we are earning, and of course a fiscal deficit of $9 billion or 5.8%, 6% of GDP. Now in budget 2021, last year's budget, we were supposed to have a deficit of about $8 billion, but with COVID-19 response, and in the response in its totality, so the response to the health sector, to some of the other sectors, the social protection programs, those grants, those income grants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, our deficit ended up being closer to 11%, more than twice of what we had and what the government had anticipated. This lower level here, giving the breakdown, Commander Heerah spoke about the allocation to national security. A picture paints 1,000 words, and this is what is happening to us in Trinidad and Tobago. I want to put this there for we the people to understand that when the debt increases, it really is an uphill battle, and it is really our debt. So from time to time, you will hear me move between third person plural, their debt or the debt to our debt. It's really our debt. So debt to GDP is ours. We, the people, are going to have to essentially dig deeply, one way or the other, to essentially service those increasingly high debt to GDP ratios. I had it at 82.7% in 2020. We are now closer to 90% in 2021. And that debt comes from borrowing on the local market, the domestic market, from the government of China, from the Latin American Bank of Latin American Development Bank, the World Bank. We've been borrowing heavily, and we've also been drawing down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And I want to make the point that certainly within the last 18 months, we have faced an unprecedented crisis. And because there was a reduction in revenues to the government had no choice but to draw down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And I always like to make the point that the Heritage and Stabilization Fund is for that. It is in part a rainy day fund, which is the stabilization part. So when oil and gas prices, which is what our budgets are predicated on, when those fall below our threshold, the anticipated threshold, the stabilization part of the fund. The challenge with the HSF is that the HSF, you have funds commingling. So the heritage part and the stabilization part, and you don't know which one you're taking down from, but you know you're drawing down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, as the law permits. But when you draw down on that, you have nothing left for future generations. Another conversation that we can come to once time permits this evening. I wanted to put up this slide in terms of persons identified for retrenchment notices. There is a narrative circulating in the country that COVID induced unemployment, and I want us to kind of reflect on this. And these are data coming out of the Ministry of Labor where retrenchment notices are served, and retrenchment notices don't equate unemployment, because you're only required to serve, to lodge a retrenchment notice with the Ministry of Labor if it's 5 or more persons that you're planning to lay off. If it's fewer than that, you don't have to say a word. And of course, if you are not registered or if you have an informal business, you don't say anything at all. But even before COVID, and so these data are from 2018, 2019, and 2020. So the yellow is 2018. So even before COVID, the period BC, as I call it, we saw that things were happening in our various sectors. So the yellow is 2018, the red is 2019, the green is 2020, and the lighter green, which would be the last bar, is 2021 as at July. I think I got these data somewhere around in July. But the point I'm making is that even before COVID, we saw that things were going a little awry in terms of our employment across various sectors. So we have petroleum, manufacturing, construction, etc. So the narrative that says that all of these things happened when COVID hit, it's not quite a correct narrative, because the data is suggesting that we had these unemployment challenges even before COVID. But I want to now turn to the people side of budget 2022. So we looked at the arithmetic, we looked at what the allocations were, but then there is the people side of it. We have to deal with unemployment, the COVID-induced unemployment, and some of it was as a result of COVID-19 and the lockdown measures where persons would have lost their jobs, would have gone on different kinds of work arrangements. So instead of working 5 days, you're working 2, et cetera, which also means that your pay would have been reduced. So the COVID-induced and the BC, the before COVID-induced unemployment. An issue that is very close to me, the intergenerational education deficit, the fact that many of our children, we don't know how many of our children, but many of our children have not been attending school since 2020, when we had to make the decision to abruptly close schools. And I just wanted to share this, that essentially the education deficit is a shortfall between your reality and what governments have committed to. So in our system, you're committed to early childhood, to primary, to secondary. Those are the commitments that we have in our education system. Tertiary is optional, but we don't know how many of our children have actually fallen through the cracks. So when we know A for apple, B for bat, C for cat, and we know that, you move into, when you turn 5, you're going to big school, and when you turn 10, you're doing common entrance or SC or whatever it's called. That cycle, I am fairly certain, has been disrupted, but we need to find out whether it has been disrupted and the extent to which it's been disrupted and what we're going to do about those disruptions. So I'm saying all of this to say that my take on the budget is less about the numbers. And this is this has been my tenor for many years. I'm less concerned about the numbers, but what do you actually do with the numbers? So if it is that we're having this education deficit, I would want to hear something about that coming out from the Ministry of Education. So it's not about the absolute quantity, they get the most money and that sort of thing, but what are you going to do with it? What is the investment? The whole question of the missing generation. Ella Andel told us that decades ago, and it's come back to haunt us. Youth crime and youth unemployment, mental health issues among adults, among children, poverty and inequalities, all of these things that essentially show the soft underbelly of Trinidad and Tobago from March of last year until now, and we need to address them. So the budget and the numbers are fine. The arithmetic is good, who get more and who didn't get and who vexed about what they get. But really, we have a population to look after, and that is really where I want to go this afternoon. And now I want to segue into what I think I would like to share with you in terms of segueing from the national circumstances into our space. I am from Tunapuna, originally from South. I have to figure out how to say that properly. JW will give me the proper wording for that. I'm a Tunapunanian via San Fernando or something like that. But this is where, I'm a Tunapunian, all right, okay. But this is where I'm tied and this is where I graze and this is what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about my community. So the budget is fine because as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I kind of want to know what's going on out there. But I'm also very concerned about where I am in this particular space. So there was something called a strategic local development plan for Tunapuna, which was shared with me as I was preparing for this evening's engagement. And there is a vision that Tunapuna, Piaku, and forgive me, I don't know where it starts and where it ends. I know it covers as far as, I think, Valencia, et cetera, in terms of the corporation. But I thought that the cohort of persons who would be here this afternoon would actually fall, many of them would fall within the Tunapuna, Piaku Regional Corporation. So pardon me if I've excluded anyone when I talk about Tunapuna, Piaku, but I think my understanding is that many of the persons who are here actually fall within that municipal region. So there is this vision to make Tunapuna, Piaku an entrepreneurial hub in Trinidad and Tobago's economy. I like that, sound good, plenty things, fancy words and those sorts of things. And from this document, that's the strategic local development plan, talks about opportunities for entrepreneurship and job creation, etc., investments, to drive entrepreneurship, economic growth, etc. All of these things are, of course, related to what is happening in the national space. So I thought, that's an interesting kind of connection to make. But in that document, that local economic development strategy document, it also talks about some of the challenges to realizing these objectives. And of course, no big secrets there, no headlines that we're not aware of. Access to foreign exchange is a bugbear, poor infrastructure. And this is all of these are about Tunapuna. These challenges here are specific to the Tunapuna Piaku region in the broadest sense. Our susceptibility to disasters, to natural hazards, including things like floods, which we see more and more of in the area, the high transactional cost of business operations, lack of facilitation of SMEs in terms of their development. Again, the issue of SMEs featuring significantly and several times in yesterday's budget presentation, as it did last year, et cetera, And of course, I have a particular view on that. Some key components of this local economy development plan for the region, these are clusters, and I'm taking this from that document. This is not the work of Marlene Attzs. This is something that I've lifted from the document. Looking at a tourism cluster, agro and heritage tourism, agricultural and food cluster, Tamana Park, higher education services cluster. And I know somewhere at some point in my mind, I've heard about this over the years. And then I want to come to what President spoke to. So enter COVID-19 and it causes us all to pause. We had to press pause. And of course, I've extracted some of these slides from the research that was done in terms of the impact of COVID-19 and how people are seeing it in terms of the Tunapuna Corporation. So this is something that was commissioned by the Greater Tunapuna Chamber. And of course, 192 businesses surveyed, 47% fully reopened. And this was done in August, as the president mentioned. Since the COVID-19, an additional 28 have reopened with reduced staff. And that says that people are unemployed. All right. And if they're unemployed, that means that it is affecting their revenue. And then you have a combined 75% of businesses have lifted, I think I put something off there. Right. They have reopened following the COVID-19, the lifting of the COVID-19 restrictions. Again, another schematic in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted on business in our community. So of the 145 businesses that employed persons, 43% have retained all employees, which means that 57% didn't. 13% were able to retain most employees. Only 7% of businesses were unable to bring back any employees. But it means that we have people there who have been directly impacted by COVID-19, i.e. they have lost their jobs and they've been put on some kind of arrangement. We need to know what's happening in our community because there are implications. Most businesses reported low customer traffic since reopening because yes, the country is reeling from from this thing called COVID-19. People have had their incomes, many persons have had their incomes impacted in one way or the other. And if you're not too sure where, well, you've had your incomes impacted directly in that you're not too sure if you're going to get your whole salary, if you're getting part of the salary, etc. But now schooling, you now have, if you had a budget that says you were spending on A, B, C, D, and E, you now have F, G, H, I, J, and K, because you have online schooling, possibly for 1, possibly for 2, possibly for 3 children. And it really doesn't, well, you can't share devices, so you have to get 3 devices. You have to make sure you pay the internet. You have to make sure you pay the light bill. You have to make sure you do all sorts of things, that there is data on your phone. You have to make sure you have plenty of snacks. And as someone who doesn't eat snacks at all, I understand the price of snacks going up, but I know I have people here who can talk more eloquently and learnedly about those things, but I understand it have snacks that gone up. So you're home with the children and you really under some pressure because the price of everything has gone up. So our COVID adjusted local economic development now has to have certain considerations. So while we would have had a strategic plan before that was fine and hunky-dory, and I don't know whether or not any of these things have been implemented. I live in Tunapuna, I don't think they've been implemented. I'm suggesting now that navigating the COVID-adjusted reality, if we want to talk about local economic development for our region, there's some considerations. Economic development is now predicated on vaccinations. So your business may or may not be able to reopen depending on your vaccination status as a proprietor, if you're an SME person, or the status of your employees. All right. There is a conversation around property tax that is linked to funding for municipal corporations. So yesterday, because of the noise that is happening in the national space around the property tax, the Minister of Finance shared that one of the things, it's not going to go into consolidated fund, it is going to be available for municipal corporations to use. And we know that municipal corporations are challenged in terms of having adequate financial resources to do what they need to do, particularly things like paying attention to the impact of the disaster management units, et cetera, et cetera. I know they're challenged in that regard. So yesterday, the minister said that the property tax is linked to funding for municipal corporations. Time will tell. The whole question of SMEs, as I said, a lot of conversation in this year's budget and previous budgets on SMEs. And I have to comment that while we talk about SMEs, also in the Tunapuna Piako, in our region, we need to recognize, and it's a point I keep making, that when the government talks loosely about incentives for SMEs, so you have these grants available, so there were the COVID grants available for SMEs to access, and now in the budget they're saying that you can have a tax reduction if your SME is earning more than $500,000 in a particular line of business. Not all SMEs are created equally. So when we talk about SMEs as if it is a homogeneous set of all of these companies look the same, they do not look the same. Some of our SMEs are into retail, some of them are buying and selling. Some of them are micro enterprises. Some of them are nano enterprises, might be 1 or 2 people inside of there running these businesses. So if we're talking about SMEs as having a role to play in economic development, both in terms of local economic development and national economic development, we have to understand the typology of SMEs. Micro, I want to suggest, MSMEs, the nano, the micro, the small, the medium enterprises, because we're treating them now in the national conversation as if they are homogeneous. They're very heterogeneous. And probably in Tunapuna, ours are probably even different. So I would want to suggest that as we have these conversations, as the chamber and your allies, the Supermarket Association, the Arima Business Association, and all of these others, that we understand the nature of our space, and we understand what works for us and advocate to get what we want to work for us in a way that makes sense. Crime and unemployment in the area, I think another pain point. I know casual empiricism, it does have shooting, there's youth unemployment, a lot of young people are involved in crime. We need to get a handle on these data because we need to understand what are the origins. Is it that they haven't completed school? Is it that, lack of employment opportunities? What are the reasons? Because if we are to talk about local economic development for our region, in the context of the 2022 budget or in any other context, we need to understand the dynamics that we're working with. So we want to set up an entrepreneurial hub in Tunapuna. We want to ensure we have ease of doing business. Crime and unemployment are going to be pain points that are going to mitigate against that success story. We need to talk about youth education and development. We need to understand, we need to have data. So I was really very happy, and I want to congratulate the Greater Tunapuna Chamber. When they provided me with those data, I was kind of like, impressed here, really like that, because we need to understand what is happening around us. So for us to go forward, so it's why I'm not interested in the budget per se. For us to go forward, for us to develop this space that we occupy, we need to understand what are our pain points, and we need to understand how to craft policy to address those pain points in a way that makes sense for us. All right, and my last point is really reiterating what I've said before, that we need to have data collection to inform strategy, to inform policy formulation, and of course, for implementation. So I just wanted to share those as opening thoughts. And I mean, I have some other conversations. So for example, we have a market. We have a market in Tunapuna. There are things that we can do, well, certainly in my mind, there are things that we can do to make our community, to develop our community in a way that redounds to the benefit for all, that redounds to the benefit of all of us who live in this particular space. So I wanted to move, and I hope you forgive me for kind of moving away from a strict conversation on the budget, because I think that's a kind of a boring conversation. And I wanted to make it more relevant in terms of what are the opportunities for us in this particular area, distilling from budget 2022 what has been said, but actually putting those in the context of what would be useful takeaways for us as we try to navigate a post-COVID or COVID-adjusted reality and develop our community. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the conversations that we can have over the next couple of minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Marlene Attzs, for the candor, a holistic perspective there. The doctor, of course, bringing forward a more people-centric presentation and sharing her screen and showing us some slides. I looked at some of the developments there with the strategic local economic plan, and we thank you for coming forward. And indeed, for the question and answer, we will hear from some more from Dr. Attzs. Food security, very important. That's at the top of everybody's mind right now. It's part of the national conversation. And a man who has really come forward and given of himself and given time in any particular space to really educate and bring forward some most relevant information concerning the topic is our next speaker. We welcome the president of the Supermarket Association, Rajiv Diptee, to share his thoughts post-budget analysis 2022. Rajiv, is all yours.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate that. I would like to give warm positive feedback to the previous presenter, Dr. Attzs. I thought she was very thorough, as well as the inimitable Mr. Garvin Heerah, Commander Heerah. I agree fully with what he said about the corruption and the sheer struggle that both presenters said with the ease of doing business and what it really presents to the business community as a whole. The business community is ever in a dynamic flux, always evolving, always trying to do business with as much tact and new as possible, and there are very much strictures in place that create entrapments at times. I would like to say welcome to my members. I am seeing several of them on the call. And I see Mr. Ali is with us from Centerpoint Mall. And it was just 2 months ago that we were vaccinating persons at Centerpoint Mall. So a warm welcome to them, as well as to the members of the Supermarket Association, all the way from Toko to Mayaro. So I'm very grateful to engage in this tonight. Now I'm going to stay in my lane, and I'm going to look at what the implications of the budget had for us at the Supermarket Association. So we experienced several challenges that are no secret during COVID-19. Chief among them, access to foreign exchange during the early periods of COVID-19, when for when we realized that we were going into a lockdown, we partnered with Exim Bank via the Ministry of Trade to ensure that a critical food items list was developed. This critical food items list would have been a list of basic food items that were given for consideration at the time, as well as sanitary products, et cetera, et cetera. During this period of COVID-19, we've seen an evolution of the conversation where shipping has become a major constraint. This is no secret. I've spoken on this several times. The shipping lanes as they are right now, the cost of a container in pre-COVID environment was closer to $3,000. I think that was around October 2019. Fast forward to today, you're paying close to $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 for a container of goods, regardless of what's in the container. And this has affected not just supermarkets, but all containerized form of transport goods. And indeed, as we note that Trinidad and Tobago is a net importer, not just of foods, but of many things. The exogenous price shocks in the food and distribution climate have been a demand and supply equation we've been unable to balance. And I would say the world has been unable to balance this where the food prices are concerned. And this is something that has continued. And it's created a situation where we've seen global shortages as we note situations developing around the world, especially with the United States and China. And that pendulum, that fulcrum of the balancing act that continues to take place. And it is at this point we want to remind everyone here that supermarkets in Trinidad and Tobago, and not just supermarkets, but also net importers of food, of price takers and not price setters. Because as long as we're not manufacturing something or making something or growing something, then we're going to be importing it. And that is very important to note, because that is where the demand for foreign exchange continues to linger. So during this period, we looked at the continued prioritization of foreign exchange. Prior to the budget, we would have made our submissions to continue the dialogue, especially with the local distributors and the local importers, because we're not working in silos anymore. We're very much synergistic. We're very much in dialogue regularly, because we are leaning on each other to ensure supply chain efficiencies from our side. So between March 2020 to now, we've expanded our basic food items list, and we've tried our best to ensure that there's some level of food security, some level of import cover, at least looking forward, forecasting a little bit into the future. We've also identified the ease of doing business as a major constraint when it comes to clearing goods, when it comes to ensuring that things go correctly. And it's no secret that it continues to linger a great deal of red tape. We've engaged in conversations about import substitution and what that means. And the truth is that these things take time. And I myself have visited some really good projects. One of them actually was by Joala Rambaran. I visited his site at Parivar, and that is an excellent initiative. It's a good example of seed capital, high intensive farming based on state-of-the-art first world technologies. And those models are extremely well put together, much like the Berry Cove Estate in Tobago, but they also require a high level of intellectual and human capital, as well as financial capital. And it's more projects like this that will continue to build towards our food security, because we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the objective here? Is it to continue to put food, to lean on the treasury and to lean on foreign exchange to continue to feed ourselves? Do we want to work towards a level of food security? So even in that context, we look at the Caribbean region and working with these people in Guyana, companies in Guyana, Jamaica, Barbados, Suriname, to try to see what we could do to import goods from them and export goods to them by working together with local bodies to come up with creative solutions. So these are things that we continue to look at. All right, so we come now to the budget concessions that were laid out yesterday, and I will jump right into it. right? So we saw removal of VAT on these items. These items which were VAT rated have now shifted to the 0 rated category. So I've put together this little list here as it was doled off the tongue and off the cuff by the Minister of Finance yesterday. So we can immediately identify these items: biscuits, cooking oil, canned veg, cornflakes, canned fish, canned meats, curry, juice, sausages, ketchup, bottled water, pigtail. It's a mouthful, I admit, and I think a picture tells 1,000 words. So we tried our best to see and put it together here, so that I know there are members of the media here, so you could always WhatsApp me for this pic, right? I'll share it with you. And this is when we put this together today, to see what it looked like based on the generalization, because it's not a specific classification. When you look at biscuits, for example, there's salty, sweet, and savory. There's there are a number of classifications. When you look at cooking oil, there's avocado, grapeseed, canola, olive. You know, okay, what exactly is it that we're getting into? So based off of our conversations, we hope to be getting some revisions of this. But this is what it looks like. So we decided to play around with this to see how this will work in the interest of the consumer. And this is, you know, what does this mean? It now means that consumers have more basic food items shifted across to the 0 rated side. And now, so we've removed the VAT from some of these items. And now we're going to go to the cash register and see how this works out for the consumer. Now, this was put together for me by one of my members in Mayaro. I said we were all the way in Mayaro as well. And this is a description of goods based off the generalized classification of what was given to us. So I want to note something here, that even though he said curry, and that even though he said canned fish, there are items, or curries are actually already in the 0 rated category, right? Sardines as well, for that matter, as well as I believe is corned beef, right? So we looked at it here, and we did a grand total. And if you see here, it's $311.08 as the description of good. We did 1 unit of each good and 3 pounds thereabouts a pigtail. And now this was pre-budget, right? So we're going to take a look at this post-budget, right? So we have the same description of goods, and it's obviously less. The removal of VAT has seen to that. It's $278.72. So let's examine this equation for the consumer, right? With VAT, $311. Without VAT, $279. The savings to the consumer is about $32 and change, equating to that figure there. And the reason that figure is where it is, as I said, curry and sardines were already on the 0 side, right? So basically removing VAT from these items is removing 12.5% from your bill, right? So that's something to look at, right?
So I just wanted to ask you really fast, because as we dealing with it in real time, based on the discussions yesterday, some health experts today, I was hearing discussions from health experts suggesting that this should have been extended to other foods, because they're suggesting that some of the canned foods and the processed foods, and of course the pigtail is high in salt and cholesterol, and it could actually, even though it's coming up on the cheaper end, it can indeed impact the citizenry and their health in the long run.
The health status of the population.
What say you? What say you to that, Mr. Diptee?
Yeah, so I agree with you, JW, because I mean, as somebody who's in the healthcare profession myself, as well as somebody who is very familiar with the non-communicable diseases that traditionally people suffer with in this country, including diabetes, hypertension, etc., obesity. These, I mean, putting much saltier foods will increase blood pressure, will increase weight retention, will have more severe side effects, especially for a population that's not really exercising right now, as we have restrictions in place still for that. And I think that it really isn't in keeping with modern outlooks, especially when we consider that the PAHO model is pivoting now to a place where they're trying to make labeling a bigger thing with the Octagon model. and letting people know just how much sodium, et cetera, is on the front of pack labeling. Now, I certainly think that there needs to be a more conscientious approach to what they're looking at. But just for the interest, I want to point this out, right? So please note, please be guided as announced in the reading of the budget yesterday, that those items that we went through earlier will be exempt from VAT on the 1st of November, 2021, right? So we went through that, those items already: biscuits, cooking oil, canned veg, cornflakes, etc. Please be aware that the following items are already zero rated as listed in Schedule 2 of the VAT Act: corned beef, curry, sardines, smoked herring. So curry was already on our list, and there were some canned fish, canned meats, etc., right? Also, please be aware that as per the legal notice dated on Sunday, which formally came into effect on Monday, these items now attract VAT: tenderloin, sirloin, frog's legs, salmon, trout, sea bass, lobster, fish, shrimps, nuts, pears, apricots, sour cherries, strawberries, black, white, red currants, peaches, nectarines, kiwi fruit, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, mulberries, loganberries, gooseberries, cranberries, and bilberries. So this was a legal notice that went out on Sunday and came into effect on Monday. So price increases as per the addition of VAT to these items have already are taking place right now. So this will actually be shared with the media in due course. We want to let them know that that when these items are going to be added to the zero rated list, and when and that these items are now moving on to the VAT rated list. So from that side of things, I believe it will create further room for discussion. And in the interest of getting into the Q&A session, as I'm looking forward to with Mr. Heerah and my other colleagues, I thank you very much.
I want to thank Mr. Diptee there for really breaking it down, and I'm very happy that you were able to bring forward in real time and via your slide the breakdown of the groceries pre-budget, post-budget, with the savings there of about $32 to the consumer. But this conversation will indeed continue later on inside the question and answer. I want to thank Mr. Bharath for his patience. He's coming up now to again shed some light. He is also part of the road to, well, the post-COVID roadmap committee, and I'm sure in that regard and with his expertise, he has much to say. So without any further delay, Mr. Bharath, the floor is yours.
Thank you, JW. Obviously, one of the issues is speaking last, and everyone's already said what you want to say, so I'll try and be as brief as I possibly can. Let me say that I do agree with Marlene that a budget is really just a set of numbers. It's really an accounting exercise. But I do believe that the minister and the government had a golden opportunity because this is a major policy statement for the government and for the prospects of Trinidad and Tobago. They had a golden opportunity to determine and set almost a vision for what the new Trinidad and Tobago would look like. Something along the lines that Marlene started off with when she talked about, post-COVID and what post-COVID looks like. And I felt that a golden opportunity was missed by the minister to set a vision, not just reel out numbers, but set a real vision for Trinidad and Tobago and how we would compete with the rest of the world and how we would actually go about creating explosive growth and being able to prepare Trinidad to receive tremendous prosperity in the future. That is what I thought this budget afforded the minister, this ability to press the reset button, so to speak. The reality, however, is that remember that this minister has boxed himself in. And Marlene alluded to some of those issues because, in my opinion, through failed economic policies of the last 6 years, we've arrived at the situation. Sure, of course, COVID has exacerbated the situation. The minister has spent 5 years blaming the opposition for the precarious position that the government and the country has found itself in. And not that I have any brief or hold any brief for the opposition, nor is there any love lost, as you'd appreciate, between them and myself. But the reality is that he spent 5 years, wasted 5 years, blaming the opposition for his failed economic policies, his policies of taxing the population, his policies of continued borrowing, his policies of taking money out of the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and his policies of selling of state assets, all brought us to a position pre-COVID where we had absolutely no growth, negative growth or zero growth for 5 years pre-COVID. We had continued, we had no new forms of revenue coming into the country. In fact, in 2020, UNCTAD, which is the United Nations Council for Trade and Development, announced that Trinidad and Tobago was at the bottom of the list as far as receiving foreign direct investments were concerned. In fact, they went as far as to say we received even less than Haiti did in 2020. I think the amount they quoted was negative $489 million US dollars. And for those of us who understand that, that actually tells you there were more outflows from out of the country than there were inflows, because it was a negative FDI, so to speak. We have, as a result of no investments in the country, we have continued to run deficits for 6 years. I'm not sure what the deficit for last year will be, but I suspect, based on what the minister in the mid-year review mentioned, where there was a projected deficit of 8.5 billion, and he mentioned that expenditure had increased by 3 billion and revenues had decreased by 5 billion. That actually adds 8 billion additional deficit. So it could be somewhere between 15, 16 billion dollars. We're looking at another $9 billion for this, for 2022 budget. Marlene talked about the fact that the debt to GDP has now gone to close to 90%. The actual debt figure is about $127 billion. And it's instructive to know, when you looked at Marlene's slide, in 2015, our debt to GDP was about 48%. And so we're now at 90%, which is almost close to, well, not quite twice, but closing in on twice the amount. We've also, in addition to the ballooning debt, we have been reducing, or we've been reducing our foreign exchange reserves. And, you know, we need to contextualize when the minister says, oh, we're back up over 7 billion. We started at 11 billion in 2015, and we're down to 7 billion now. But as Marlene rightly said, 644 million of that comes from the gift from the IMF. 2.5 billion of that are foreign investment, are foreign loans that are sitting in foreign reserves. And 2.1 billion of it comes from your Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So if you took 2.5, you took 2.1, and you took $644 million out of foreign reserves, we're down to less than 2 billion from 11 billion. So that is the reality of how we're spending our money and spending our valuable foreign exchange reserves. So to be able to, if we are continuing at this rate, which is probably spending just over 100 million a month, we essentially, if you net all of those off, we're essentially down to just a couple of months worth of import cover, not 8 months as he's spoken about. And the final thing I want to say is that in the last 6 years, this country has not received a single positive rating from any of the agencies. We've danced and dallied around downgrades, and they didn't grade, and it's a stable and this, but the reality is that this country has not seen a single positive rating from any international agency over the last 6 years. So the reality is, what does this all mean for Trinidad and Tobago as we go forward? And what this means is that we are in a very precarious position because of the economic policies we have implemented in the past. And I always judge people on their track record. I judge people not on their promises, because this minister has been very long on promises and very short on delivery in the last 6 years, as is evident from the fact, if you look at the budget speech yesterday, you'll see a number of projects that have been promised since 2016 that still continues to come forward year after year after year. And that is an issue with our budgeting process, because governments, and whether it's this government or past governments, are never really held accountable in any measurable way for delivery of projects. So we could continue to talk ad infinitum for about all of the projects that we didn't do and we're going forward in, but we never have forced to account for how far we've reached. I want to ask a question, because it wasn't mentioned yesterday. What is happening to Petrotrin? What about the Bray project? Are they not important anymore to Trinidad and Tobago? How come they just dropped off the whole scene as far as the presentation of the budget is concerned? And these are the issues that we continue to have. And so therefore I felt that we had a golden opportunity here to press this reset button, draw a line in the sand and say, okay, this is how we're going to do this from here on. We've had mistakes in the past. Other countries are now drawing that line in the sand, pressing the reset button, bringing the right resources in to actually catapult their economies into a position of growth. And what's going to happen is, as a direct result, they're going to speed ahead of Trinidad and Tobago. The minister spent a tremendous amount of time yesterday, you'll notice, speaking about energy and energy prices again. What that tells me is that poor diversification is going to play a secondary role again, simply because of energy prices increasing. What was instructive was that he talked about natural gas production, which is at, I think he said, 2.6 billion for 2021. It's going to go to 3.3 billion in 2022 and 3.6 billion in 2023. But our installed capacity in Trinidad and Tobago requires 4.2 billion. So what is he saying? He didn't say what's going to happen with the shortfall. How is the installed plant in Trinidad and Tobago going to survive from now till, well, whenever we can get to 4.2? Or is he making the assumption that those plants are going to leave Trinidad and Tobago and we're not going to require the 4.2 billion of installed capacity? These are the gaps that I talk about. And a lot of these issues were discussed in a roadmap committee, you know, and I don't have the time to go into all of it now, but I want to talk just briefly, for example, about what I consider to be very dear to my heart and very important and should be a priority, and follows on from what Rajiv said just now with regard to food prices. And he says, you know, supermarkets are a price taker. And of course, they're price takers because they purchase, whether it's local food or whether it's imported food. The reality is that we are importing 85% of what we consume. 85% of what we consume in terms of food items, we're importing into Trinidad and Tobago. And we have no control over the shipping prices. We have no control over commodity prices. We have no control of the margins that, or the supply chain management from other countries. We have no control over that. In the roadmap committee to recovery, there were several suggestions made with regard to agriculture. None of them, as far as I'm aware, I've certainly not heard of any of them, have been implemented or even started to be implemented. $500 million was allocated last year for agriculture, additionally to the budget. This year, I see it's been reduced to $300 million. I'm not quite sure what's inside of it. But the reality is that in Trinidad and Tobago, unless you have security of tenure, you cannot, as a farmer, access the incentives, whether it's the 300 million, the 500 million, or any incentive in Trinidad, unless you have security of tenure. And in the majority of cases, a lot of farmers do not have security of tenure because the leases have not been renewed by the ministry. So through no fault of their own, they're not able to access the incentives, which makes them, of course, uncompetitive with the exports that are coming into Trinidad and Tobago. When I was minister, what we did was we waived the necessity for security of tenure for those farmers who have been planting on their land for more than 5 years. So what that did was it alleviated the issue of them having to go through the bureaucracy that was not their fault, the ministry's fault, to be able to access these incentives. That, of course, was stopped when this government came into office. Simple things like a mandate to ensure that all state companies, whether it's or state enterprises like prisons, school feeding program, the army, they're mandated that in a best case situation that they consume only locally grown produce. How difficult is that to do? How difficult is that to do? It's not difficult at all. One of the reasons why imported produce comes into Trinidad and Tobago, and sometimes having paid the duties and the freight and everything else is more competitive than what we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, is the use of technology. I happened to be a guest of the Costa Rican government in 2011, and I was able to witness with the use of technology, the Costa Rican farmers, and most of them have they're formulated as cooperatives, their yields for basic food items like tomatoes and cucumbers and cabbage and so on is probably between 6 and 10 times what ours is here in Trinidad today, simply because of the use of technology. That was one of the recommendations to the Roadmap Committee, that we introduce in a significant way the use of technology for two reasons. One, increase in yields and increase in profitability. And secondly, it would encourage young people to want to get involved, because young people are going to be far more attracted to using technology for growing, for getting involved in agriculture, as opposed to the backbreaking day-to-day work that the existing farmers are involved in. And one of the final things that was recommended to the committee was, and I'm harping on agriculture here because I think it's important, one of the final things that was recommended was some form of guaranteed pricing for farmers. So for a period of time, if we accept, like we did in the 70s, that point leases was important, and we would put the natural, and we would put the resources and the incentives behind it. In the same way, if we understand and realize and we accept that agriculture is important, let us now put the necessary infrastructure, let us put the hand-holding process in place, let us incentivize in a real way farmers in Trinidad. So one of the things I said is, if a farmer is producing tomatoes and the price of tomatoes goes up to $15, and Rajiv would understand this from a supermarket's perspective, everybody wants to grow tomatoes. As a result of that, suddenly there's a glut in the market for tomatoes, and tomatoes goes to $5 a pound. Makes it uneconomical for the farmer sometimes to even go and pick the crop to take it to the market. So what we recommended was take a basket of products, basic products, tomatoes, cucumbers, melon, germ, cabbage, bodi, whatever it is, to be determined, and say to the farmers, you grow as much as you possibly can of a certain quality, and we will guarantee you a price at the beginning of the year of X dollars per pound of this produce. The farmer knows upfront that his cost of production is $3 a pound. He knows he's getting $8 a pound. He's committed to selling this produce at $8 a pound. He doesn't have to worry about gluts in the market. He doesn't have to worry about taking it and selling it to a middleman. He's getting his $8 a pound, and his incentive, therefore, is to grow as much as he possibly can to get $8 a pound. What happens on the other side? You have to reform an organization like a NAMDEFCO to almost be private focus driven, where NAMDEFCO now, or similar type organization, will be responsible for the offload of that produce into the marketplace. And the marketplace can be the export markets, it can be agro-processing, it can be the supermarkets, it can be the hotels, but NAMDEFCO or a similar organization with a private sector there would be in a position now to offload that produce. What does that do? What it does, it creates a culture amongst the farming community that they can grow as much as they possibly can of a particular product, of a particular quality. They would themselves invest in their farms and their equipment. Young people would want to get involved because there's money to be made. And you would now start to develop a real agriculture sector with critical mass. Not a here today, gone tomorrow, peaks and troughs, as we say in economics, but developing a critical mass of farmers who know that whatever they grow will be sold. And if we can do that for a period of 3 years, in addition to all of the other things I said, where we're creating markets through the prisons and the school feeding program and the army and so on, and we can create that critical mass, then we will create a culture in Trinidad and Tobago of growing more food. And once we start to do that, we're going to get more and more young people involved in this whole process of growing food and using more and more technology, because it's going to be a profitable and it's going to be an enterprise that they would want to get involved with. Now, this is not rocket science. This is what the rest of the world is going to be doing. Why is it that we in Trinidad and Tobago do not have the political will to put the resources behind those things? And all I'm saying is we have to identify, the budget, as Marlene says, is irrelevant, quite frankly. To me, it's just a policy statement. What the budget needs to send is a clear message. These are the priority issues and the priority areas for a new Trinidad and Tobago to exist and thrive in a post-COVID situation. We accept that we are going to be in a highly competitive world. What are the areas where we can be competitive in? And we need to put the resources, like we did in Point Lisas, behind those projects and make them happen, regardless of which government is in office. That must be an accepted truth, that this is what's best for Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, this is the big caveat. Unfortunately, because of the way our politics is in Trinidad and the way we vote in Trinidad, we will never get, or unfortunately, it will be very difficult to get to a position where we all agree on what's best for Trinidad and Tobago, because whatever this government does could never be good for the next sort of people who want to come in. And when they come in, they're going to try to dismantle for the first 2 years what this government did, because that's the basis on which we campaign, and so it goes in cycles. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago are unfortunately the ones who suffer the end of the day. So those are my 2 cents that I wanted to add. I'm sorry I spoke about agriculture a little bit more than I spoke of the other issues, but I feel deeply passionate that unless we can feed ourselves, we're going to find ourselves with all of the technology, with all of the digital age that's upon us and the technology and the computers and blah, 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 blah. We're never going to be able to eat those things. The technology is just a tool to be able to allow us to do things in a better way. And there are many other things we need to talk about. We need to talk about the new world of education, the new world of healthcare. We need to have public service reform, because it doesn't matter what policy a government puts in place, unless you have the public service and deliver those goods and services to the population, really and truly, it's just a policy that's going to sit on the books. And there's a lot more I have to say, and hopefully when the question and answers come, I can elaborate on something. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Bharath, for coming forward. Very frank, analysis. You would have identified our lack of accountability and lack of vision. I sometimes call what you described to the very end of your dialogue there, the division in our national vision when policies are turned over by incoming administrations. You also identify the blame game tactic used by the Minister of Finance and the fact that we have been in a deficit for the last 6 years. Everyone coming forward today really brought a lot to the discussion, and I think now it's only appropriate to let the 111 participants who are here with us feel free to be part of the discussion. I'm going to go into the chat room as we speak. For those who want to basically come forward, you could also raise your hand and we will try to get you in the discussion. So let me try to back it up to the very first question that came out here. This was from Avinash Ramsobag. He said, Mr. Diptee, are you saying that the third list will now be subject to VAT, meaning it will be more expensive? And he's thinking that the items you identified are not luxurious items, but more healthy options. Mr. Diptee, what say you?
If he's talking about the last slide, and I believe I will pull it back up just to share very quickly.
Yeah, that was with the berries, all the berries and all the other stuff that you said.
Yeah. So I have it here. Let me share it for the good gentleman. And 1 second. Right. So, right. 1 second, 1 second. Right. So
and from your presentation, you said that this particular transcript came forward on Sunday night to be implemented last Monday.
Right. So what we saw in the reading of the budget was the announcement of what would be making a shift from the VAT rated to the zero rated. What was the second paragraph here identifies what we unearthed as already existing in the zero rated category. This here is a legal notice that was that came from literally it was a overnight shift from Sunday to Monday to move these goods onto the VAT rated list. So there's an entire family of berries, an entire family of salmon, because it's actually a lot more specific in the legal notice. They've identified Pacific, Atlantic, Norwegian lobster, and then basically a whole family of shellfish. But these items are the ones that the government has moved into the schedule of what they consider to be luxury import goods. So this is something that Avinash should be aware of from the government's position to place these items on the imports luxury items list.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Let me bring this one across. Let me get this other question here now. This is for Mr. Bharath. And again, we're asking the panelists if we can indeed ensure the response it's concise as always and brief, so we could get as many questions in the discussion. So this one comes from Ian Cox. Mr. Bharath, he wants to know, what are your recommendations to reduce the estimated $100 million per month government expenditure? Mr. Bharath, what say you?
$100 million from what?
So he wants to know, let me just get this question again. So this is a question submitted by Ian Cox. He wants to know your recommendation let me just get this one more time, to reduce the estimated $100 million you spoke about in your presentation in government expenditure. That's the $100 million per month. Your recommendation to reduce that, Mr. Bharath.
I think he's talking about the use of foreign exchange.
Yes.
Well, obviously, you know, Marlene, no, not Marlene, Rajiv mentioned earlier on how much we're actually importing as far as food is concerned. We're importing somewhere in the region of about $6 billion worth of food. If we were to start growing more of our food, creating food security, we could reduce a significant amount of that 5.8 billion or 5.85 billion on an annual basis. The other things too is the minister's already started taxing a lot. I would certainly have a different tier of taxes for high-end goods. Things like, I mean, why should champagne attract the same duties, for example, as water or anything else? Caviar, why should it attract the same duties? I'm not saying you shouldn't allow it to be brought in, but let it be taxed at a point where those who wish to purchase it have to pay the relevant price, because I think those are unnecessary. Those are in today's environment with Trinidad and Tobago not earning or significant amounts of foreign exchange, because we don't have the kind of exports that are generating foreign exchange. I believe that super luxury items should be taxed at a higher rate than ordinary items, and that would act as a deterrent to those who want to actually purchase it. And of course, if they did, they would have to pay higher rates of duty. So I think there are a number of things that we can do to look at reducing it, but certainly the front burner one for me is to actually start growing a lot more of what we consume in terms of what we eat in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you indeed. I want to bring forward this other question from Joy Francis. This actually is more or less to everyone, but I want to actually bring in Dr. Attzs and Commander Heerah. on this one. I'll actually start with Commander Heerah, because you was the one in your presentation, you actually got the ball rolling, speaking about digitization. And Joy Francis wants to know, do you think we have the sufficient IT infrastructure in place that will encourage businesses to enter into digitization? Commander?
I honestly think it's a work in progress. Yes, the minister spoke about a whole of government. He spoke about an intergovernmental sort of interministerial systems integration regarding technology, but it is something that can work. And Trinidad and Tobago needs to take a step back and proceed through this corridor with a very meticulous approach of, first and foremost, identifying a phased development to achieve the objectives of that encouragement of ease of business regarding technology. And a good model is Estonia. When you look at Estonia that has moved towards an e-government, you can actually be an e-citizen of Estonia with a similar population of Trinidad and Tobago, and with various challenges, sometimes in some instances, even more challenges than Trinidad and Tobago. So, and their achievement was done over a phased development with a clear-cut vision. Mr. Bharath spoke about the vision, and are we articulating our vision and developing and shifting, adjusting our strategies and policies regarding a one vision, regardless of who comes into power? Can we maintain focus on a vision? And in this way, a fully digitized, technologically driven governmental approach to ease of business will be a good approach, but it has to be developed over phases and clearly defined objectives along these phases, and use good international models. And Estonia is an example that we can look at.
Thank you, Commander. Dr. Attzs, you want to add to the discourse?
Yes, if I may. Yes, the Estonia model is in fact the model that the government is trying to look at in terms of how Trinidad and Tobago progresses. But in terms of the specific question, whether or not I think we have sufficient IT infrastructure to support the digitization thrust that the government has embarked on, I think the short answer is no, we don't. And the infrastructure, I'm saying both in terms of the physical infrastructure, I don't think it is yet in place, but I'm also looking at it from the side of the skills. I think we have to appreciate that there will have to be a learning curve associated with digitalization at the level that the government is thinking of embarking on. And I think we have to put the requisite systems in place to kind of ease some of our citizens. There are those of us, well, generation X, Y, Z, they will probably tap into that. In fact, they're already there. So when we had to navigate from face-to-face teaching to online teaching, some of our young persons did that seamlessly. But we have to remember that we have an aging population, and there will need to be some investment in time and effort and infrastructure to allow us to capitalize on and to realize the benefits from a digital transformation, or the digitization strategy that the government is embarking on. So I would want to suggest no at this time. I don't think we have sufficient IT infrastructure. I mean, just think about it. On any given day, we are challenged. If you're on your mobile phone, you're challenged to actually get a transaction done or to complete a call, as the case might be. And as I was giving an example in another session this morning, many businesses have tried to digitize their systems, but I was giving a story of having to do a transaction at a non-bank financial institution. So I went online to execute the transaction, and I was told to complete the form online, print the form, and then take it into the nearest branch of that particular non-banking financial institution. This is a fairly large non-banking financial institution. So I'm saying the will is there. We need to invest on the softer side. We need to invest in the people side of things and get people on board, but we also need to invest in the infrastructure, because I simply don't think that we have sufficient infrastructure to make digitization the reality that we'd want it to be at this time.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Just a few more questions, and I think this next question is a very interesting one, submitted by Viana Sharma. And I'll ask everyone to weigh in on this very potent question. It's as follows. Using the recommendation for a people-centered budgetary allocation, what measures can the private sector provide to the Ministry of National Security to effectively address the several emerging threats, including human trafficking, smuggling of illicit products, drug trafficking, and the wide range of internal criminality driven by community gangs? I'll start with Mr. Bharath and work our way up to the commander.
JW, I think we are in an environment now where we can no longer operate in silos. As a country, I'm talking about. If we are to progress, we really need to have genuine collaboration and proper communication amongst all of us, even though we form different segments of society. We may have the business sector, and even the business sector is divided up into the retail sector and the manufacturing sector and supermarkets and so on. The reality is that we have to have genuine collaboration and proper communication with regard to the policies that we've all bought into that's good for Trinidad and Tobago going forward. And that's why I talked earlier on about a vision for Trinidad and Tobago. What does Trinidad and Tobago look like in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time? That is not a political decision, but it's a decision that we've all bought into as the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That's what's best for us. If we can agree that, then we can agree that we have to work together to make those things happen. And if we could, now in many instances, and all of us know this, communities will turn a blind eye to criminality in their own communities because of several reasons. One, they may be fearful that they may become victims of the criminals. Secondly, they may be related to the criminals and so forth, and therefore they are protecting them. And thirdly, they may be benefiting from the criminal activity because the criminal is actually, in many instances, helping these people with their day-to-day lives, as we've seen.
It's the eater food syndrome.
Yes,
that's what they call it.
But the reality is, in many instances, we can't be quick to just cast blame on in many instances, because we don't know the circumstances in which many of these children have grown up. Many of them have been socially and economically impoverished in growing up. Many of them may not have had the opportunity to attend school. Many of them may not have had parents at home. Many of them have, were malnutrition when they were growing up. So there are many things that causes people to go in a certain direction, simply because we have not put in place, as a caring enough country, in my opinion, the social and economic situations to cause everyone to be able to rise up. And so therefore, in many of these cases, these communities protect these criminals and they don't inform, and criminals thrive as a direct result. I am saying, if we have a policy position for Trinidad and Tobago, how are we going to deal with these socially deprived children, for example, when they're growing up? I think that more and more people will voluntarily want to get involved in seeing a better country. But I think we've got to define first of all, who are we as Trinidad, who are we as Trinese, right? What does Trinidad mean? What does Trinidadian and Tobagonian mean to us? And we need to be able to define Trinidad and Tobago. And I think if we were able to do that, we're going to get much more participation from the communities and much more participation generally from all sectors, including the private sector, religious bodies, and everybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Bharath. And to Mr. Diptee now, again, recommendations that the private sector could provide to the Ministry of National Security to address the issues identified.
Yeah, I took a look at the question, Jason, and I saw that the person used the word emerging. Now, these threats have been here all the time. It's just that we have become painfully aware of them during COVID because of the acuteness of the environment, where every little every little consternation has turned into a constant agitation. The thing about it is we've known for some time the kids who've been below the poverty line, the families who have lost traditional values. They've not, that family culture, the community culture is missing. The attitudes, values, norms of parents from whom the children learn is something that is just altogether too absent. And we're in a position to talk about it because at the stores, at the supermarkets, we hire grassroots to work for us. So we see full well what's happening out there and the culture, especially with the vulnerable youths who get into the whole zest culture of guns, gangs, and women. And it's been an albatross around society's neck because not everyone wants to face up to that or own up to that or see it for what it is. Right? It's a societal decay that is rotten to its core. The next generation, and we've lost a lot of our values as a people from the as decades now. They've been eroded, and it used to be that as Mr. Bharath said, we were our brother's keeper. Now you lock your doors. You don't want to know who living next door. You're putting up burglar proof and you be coming. And the thing about it is, where young people are concerned, they don't feel like they have an upward opportunity to progress in business, in society, in jobs. For a long time, the culture was go to school and get an education, become a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer. Those professions have run its course because in many cases, many of those persons now are applying for jobs, and it's a situation that has become exacerbated. So from our side, there needs to be amending. There needs to be certainly we don't work in silos anymore either. We in the supermarkets, distribution, retail across the board. I mean, the vaccination drive brought us all together, and we valued what that kind of synergy could create for us. So we were really thrilled. So I see it as what it is right now. The private sector has a big role to play, but the biggest role starts at home. And it really, really starts with our leaders as well, because they have to set the tone. Too much of the audacity of the politics of the country that we live in is too audacious when children could interpret what is being said out there as it's okay to bully somebody else. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Diptee, there for the candor, very honest and frank. I want to bring in Dr. Attzs to give her piece on the said question. Dr. Attzs, it's all yours.
Hi, thanks, JW. I mean, it's interesting that what is articulated is essentially aligned to what I would have presented, that until and unless we recognize that we have youth at risk, young men and young women, and we seek them out and we identify what might be the gaps in their schooling and their socialization. I mean, we can't be all things to all persons, but the question essentially suggests to me that we realize that the chickens are coming home to roost in a way that is extremely poignant and catastrophic for us. So COVID-19 would have exacerbated, as I said, it would have showed the soft underbelly of gaps that we have in our society. And we need to close those. We need to find, even if we use that as the starting point, to find out who are our youth at risk, both young men and young women, because I make the point on occasion when I speak on these things that crime is not gender specific. We seem to think that young women don't get involved in crime, or they're not drivers. Young men sometimes get involved in crime because of the woman in their lives. So they want to treat the girl good. They want to treat their mothers, their aunts, their grandmothers. So that sometimes is and I was having a discussion with the former commissioner of prisons, that sometimes is the motive for them to get involved in crime. But the point I want to make is that we have to address very frontally the issue of youth at risk in our society, whatever might be the issues that have led to those youths being at risk. I certainly don't subscribe to the view that poverty is of itself a driver to get someone involved in criminality. So, but I think from a policy perspective, it is something that we need to look at because as we all know, the face of crime is looking younger and younger. You hardly ever see an old person involved in crime anymore. So as a country, I think we have a responsibility to address these issues and to identify what are the causal factors and to address them in a holistic manner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Attzs. I want to find out finally from Commander Heerah, how do we pivot and take ourselves from this slippery slope we find ourselves based on the question that was presented? And this will be very relevant to your particular expertise also. So I'm looking forward to your response. What say you, Commander Heerah?
Yeah, thank you. I want to compliment each of the respondents based on how they contributed to the question. And if you were to take each of them into that repository, we would have had a perfect answer. There's something that you must understand, which is called the triangle of crime. The triangle of crime includes crime, the criminal, and the environment. That's the triangle. The first point is the crime, the criminal, and the environment. And therefore, the private sector can easily get involved with national security in addressing any one of those three aspects of the triangle that can reduce crime or bring things under some sort of control, whether it's a joint venture to deal with the environment, a joint venture to deal with the criminal, or a joint venture to deal with the crime itself. What we are not seeing is that sort of engagement by the Ministry of National Security and its key players, its agents, with the private sector. Private sector basically has to beg and to knock the door and to try to seek an engagement or have a meeting. And you get these really nice fluff meetings that offer very good PR and good mileage, but it goes nowhere. Look, Rajiv, Mr. Diptee spoke about the vaccination drive. I had spoken and advocated in a series of forums of getting the private sector and the events management people involved quickly because they know mass management. They know how to do projects at that level. They bring bands, they produce fets, bring those people aboard. And when we started engaging them, then you saw the vaccination drive taking a different channel and being quite effective. The private sector is pregnant with issues and ideas and out-of-the-box thinking and entrepreneurial approaches and entrepreneurial mindsets to bring forward new ideas and systems that can address crime. But clearly in the question it identifies the gangs, it identifies the threat and some of those strong words. But we cannot leave crime and the focus in that area. There is corruption, there's white-collar crime, there's shirt and tie crime, air-conditioned office boardroom crime. So therefore, we cannot only, and Dr. Attzs was quite correct in dealing with the underprivileged youths and youths at risk, because that there are root causes and importation of cultures that are, changing the mindset of our young people in Trinidad and Tobago. But we cannot dismiss the fact that we have transnational organized crime in Trinidad, and that is a contributor to where we are. And I would end by saying this. There's a new face, and the word emerging is in the question. And I want to throw some adding to that new word emerging. There's a new face of criminality that is emerging in Trinidad and Tobago, which is the cross-fertilization between Latin American criminality and the Trinidadian gang criminality. And a new criminal is being formed to stand up in the middle. That Venezuelan mass migration and our local criminality is now fertilizing a new thinking type of criminal. Is or are our agencies prepared to deal with this new criminality? That there is a significant threat to us moving forward, to businesses, to advancement, and to dealing with youths at risk. So we now have a new criminality, a new face is going to emerge sooner or later. And those are some of the concerns that we have to prioritize as we advance the agenda.
Thank you, Commander. I want to bring forward Kevin Bagaloo. Kevin had his hand up within the space. Kevin, if you're hearing me, you can come on the floor and you can put forward your question. This now is for Kevin Bagaloo.
Hello, good night, everyone there, and to the panel and all in attendance. First of all, let me just say it is very great to participate and be a part of this forum here. And everyone would have contributed somewhat significantly there. But for me, respectfully, the two basically the two speakers there tonight that would have covered basically everything there would have been Mr. Vasant Bharath and Dr. Attzs. So, both of you made very good points there. Like, for example, Dr. Attzs would have spoke about prior to COVID and the economy and so on, which is very important. And Mr. Bharath spoke about when governments change policy. I guess that's basically the regression part of it there. So what I'm getting at here is that people, the average tax-paying citizen on the ground, if you wish to say, people are hearing about the budget and being presented even over the years. And they are yet to understand how is all of that going to impact their lives or reach down the benefits being passed or the policies being passed. How do they benefit from that? And my question to both Mr. Bharath and Dr. Attzs would be, how would you advise government or advise those in authority, or what advice can you give them to ensure that whatever resources are passed, it reaches down to the average citizen of Trinidad and Tobago? Thank you.
All right. I guess you can respond based on the statement then.
JW, I'd like to go first, and I'd like to link. Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr.
That's Kevin Bagalu.
Bagalu. I'd like to thank Kevin for his question, and I want to link it to a question that's in the chat from Indu Sharma. Indu's question asks in part, if the budget reflects an aspiration to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I smiled when I saw that question. And then, of course, Kevin came along and he was asking his question. So I would like to use the opportunity to link the two issues. The Sustainable Development Goals, as many persons may know, are goals which all member countries of the United Nations agreed to, that we would achieve certain targets by the year 2030. So one of the targets would be, of course, universal education, would be reducing income inequalities, poverty eradication, issues related to maternal health, food security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm deliberately identifying these because I think they're aligned to the conversation that we would have started earlier that said, the budget really is less about the numbers. It is an accounting activity in which we engaged yesterday, in which the Minister of Finance engaged yesterday. And really what we need to be distilling from that, the government really should be taking the lead in that, but we the people really should be distilling from that. What do these numbers mean for us in terms of making improvements in our lives? Arthur Lewis, who was a Nobel laureate in economics from St. Lucia, he's one of our own, a Caribbean son. He said good economics begins with a concern for the conditions under which people live. So the numbers really are less important as opposed to what do we get for the returns on those investments. So for example, when the Ministry of Social Development gets its allocation, is it simply to give out grants to people on a periodic basis or to invest in programs where people can lift themselves out of poverty? I mean, some may take longer than others, but is there some kind of progression? And I think during the conversation this evening, we raised the issue of what are the targets. So it might have been in my conversation this morning. What are the targets? How do we know how well we are doing? So when we have a budget deficit of, let us presume that to invest in improving the lives of the people in Trinidad and Tobago, we have to borrow, we have to incur debt, we have to run budget deficits. Do we have any metric that we can use to measure to say that having invested, having borrowed, reaching to close to 90% of your debt to GDP, that we have seen an improvement in the lives of persons in Trinidad and Tobago? And I think that is the crux of the matter, and I think that is where we would want to get our politicians going in that direction. There is an indicator that the UNDP uses, the Human Development Index, which measures three criteria: educational attainment, per capita GDP, and access to healthcare in your countries. I am waiting with bated breath to see what those indicators look like for us in Trinidad and Tobago, if they are honest, what those indicators would look like for us, let's say in the year 2022, 2023, because of course it is a large set of data that they use. But if you were to look at the years 2020 and 2021, what would our numbers look like for enrollment? Normally, we would just kind of like slap off that, you know, we have 100% enrollment in primary, secondary, early childhood, et cetera, et cetera. What are our numbers going to look like? And for me, that is a measure of whether or not the investments by government, as evidenced by whether it's their levels of borrowing or the debts or the deficits that they incur, whether or not that course of action by the government has in fact yielded in a population that is better off. And I don't mean in terms of standard of living, but I'm talking about quality of life. And that is in a sense aligned to the whole question of the Sustainable Development Goals. But in short to your response, and in part to Kevin's response as well, I think we are going to be challenged to achieve those many of those Sustainable Development Goals in terms of things like poverty eradication, access to education at all primary, secondary levels, etc. And certainly things like income inequalities, because COVID-19 showed us very starkly that there are inequalities in Trinidad and Tobago that were unearthed because of COVID-19. So the way in which some people were able to very quickly shift the pendulum from face-to-face teaching because they had the financial wherewithal, because the schools that they were attended were schools where teachers were schooled in online teaching, they knew the curriculum, they knew how to navigate the system quickly, and then there were others. We're still having conversations in 2021 about access to water. That is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, every time I heard the conversation around the protocols, wash your hands, etc., and I'm saying, I wonder if we're realizing that there are people in Trinidad and Tobago who don't have water to wash hands regularly and don't have sufficient living space to social distance. So these are some of the issues that I think have to be unearthed and have to be addressed frontally every time we have a budget presentation. Yes, we know it's an accounting figure, but we have to hold, and I think Vasant was the one who made the point about holding our political directorate accountable. These are the things that I think are the hallmarks of a country that is trying to achieve a greater level of development. So I mean, that's my long answer to Kevin's question and to Indu's comment in the chat.
Thank you, Dr. Attzs. I'll let Mr. Bharath respond, and then after that, we'll just do closing remarks, and then we'll have our vote of thanks. Mr. Bharath, the floor is yours.
Thanks, AW. And to a large measure, I agree with everything Marlene has said there. The reality is, at the end of the day, the ordinary man in the street is not concerned about budget deficits or debt to GDP or balance of payments. They're not concerned. That goes over their head, and they're not actually concerned about it. There's something called the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is a triangle that talks about human beings and what their actual needs are that needs to be satisfied, and there are 5 stages. But predominantly, the first stage relates essentially to food and shelter, the physiological needs. So I think in the first instance, people are concerned about how are they going to put food on the table tomorrow morning. That's what they're concerned about. They're concerned about how they're going to pay the rent so that they can continue to be sheltered. How they're going to buy clothes or medicines. Those are the most basic things that people are concerned about with regard to a budget. How is it going to impact their day-to-day lives? How are they going to survive in the first instance? Okay, before they can think about the next level up, which essentially would be their safety needs. How are they going to be protected to know, for example, that they're not going to suffer a home invasion, or if they went out, they're not going to be murdered or raped on the streets. Those are the kinds of things that a budget needs to tell people, the ordinary man on the street. Of course, it goes the needs triangle goes up all the way up to self-actualization, but we're not going to discuss those. But those are the things that are important to the ordinary man on the street. How is it going to impact? What is going to happen? When I turn the water on tomorrow morning, am I going to get water in my pipe? Is the garbage going to be picked up tomorrow? And each of these have varying levels of importance to the citizen. Of course, the most basic, as I said, would be food and shelter. So these are the things that are important when a budget is presented. These are the things I think as politicians we lose sight of when we talk about delivering a budget and all of the policies involved. And yes, you have to craft a vision, but that's at a different level. You then have to sell that vision to your population, but to sell that vision to the population, you have to have created the basic needs that they feel comfortable that they are part and parcel of that vision for the future.
Indeed, I want to thank you, and of course all the panelists. I'll give everyone a chance to give their closing remarks. Just a couple of quick notes here. I'm seeing that in the chat room, people are actually asking for some of the slides and some of the information that was presented. So I guess probably in the closing remarks, and I'll start with Dr. Attzs, because I know you got to make a move very soon. You could probably address that. And just in the closing remark, really, I want to find out from the panel, your vision, your personal vision. Yes, budget aside and all that, but your vision for our twin island, Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Attzs, I'll start with you. As they say, ladies first.
My vision for Trinidad and Tobago is for all of us to realize that we don't just live here. This is a space that we need to invest in, and investing in Trinidad and Tobago means investing in a better Trinidad and Tobago. So it matters not whether, and Vasant made that point, who is in power. I think we need to know what we want as Trinbagonians, and we need to send those signals very clearly that mediocrity, the time has come for us to do things differently. One of the points Vasant made in his initial set of comments was that there was a lost opportunity in budget 2022. And I agree with that, because COVID-19 has impacted us in a way that in an unimaginable way. And we simply continue talking in the budget as if it was business as usual, so we predicated on a price of $65 a barrel of oil and that sort of thing, when we really have an opportunity to do things differently and to give our future generations hope that Trinidad and Tobago can look and feel differently in a COVID-adjusted space. So those are we're doing the best we can, but those are my closing comments at this time.
In terms of access to some of the slides, Doctor?
Yes, I'll send it to Melissa, and the chamber will do the needful, yeah?
Fantastic. Let me bring in again, the ever vibrant and always a man who breaks it down in a meaningful way, the president of the Supermarket Association, for your closing remarks and your vision for Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Diptee. It's all yours.
I really want to say thank you to everybody who made it on this call. I listened to Mr. Bharath, who as always elucidates the information great. As I said, the inimitable Mr. Heerah with his contributions, always very salient, very relatable points. Dr. Attzs for the wonderful positions and policies that she's addressed for us. And I think that there's so much potential in Trinidad and Tobago for what we can do. And I agree fully with Dr. Attzs that regardless of who is in power, that we as Trinbagonians can chart our own destiny. And I think that it's time, it's 2021, we're going into 2022, that we need to take control of our own destinies and continue to demand more, demand better. Even though the world is shifting towards digital transformation, it's not as easy as that in this island. So I'm around JW. I think I have to chat with you in the morning, actually. So I'll see you
bright and early. Yeah, bright and early in the morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
For sure. Thank you indeed. Commander Heerah, the floor is yours. Your vision.
Thank you. I would quickly say thanks again to each member of the team tonight, and thanks again for the engagement from our attendees. My vision is to be more transformational than transactional in order to deal with resilience in the face of a global pandemic.
Okay, that's it there for the remarks. And finally on the floor, we bring forward again Mr. Bharath for your closing remarks and your vision for Trinidad and Tobago.
My vision, JW, is I envision a society where we are able to utilize all of our resources, human and natural resources, to produce what I would call high quality political goods and services to all of our citizens, free of corruption, free of bias, free of nepotism, whilst at the same time creating and generating wealth for future generations, whether it's through our heritage fund or otherwise. And also I envision a country where we can have institutions that are free of political interferences. I think if we get to that stage, we are going to be in a position to deliver all of the things that are required to improve the quality of lives of our people, of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Mr. Bharath. You know, I must say again, a personal thanks to actually be here to be part of this discussion. Some of the findings and some of the great candor will be expressed via the morning brew. When I step forward in the morning, I'll definitely make mention of this great meeting, this post-budget session. I want to invite at this point in time the president of the Arima Business Association, Christian Rampasad, the president, to move the vote of thanks. Mr. Rampasad, it's all yours.
Good night. Thank you, JW. As president of the Arima Business Association, and on behalf of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the Supermarkets Association, and the Rotary Club of St. Augustine, it is my task and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks tonight. I want to thank all of our featured speakers here today for their invaluable information and engaging perspectives and discussion. Dr. Attzs, your comments on the present state of governance, both past and present, of being able to diagnose problems, find theories to solve the problems, but not being able to implement, was very informative and very real to all of us. Your thoughts on SMEs and actually bringing up that new point of a nano part of the dilemma was not known to many of us at this point. And the fact that you brought out the fact that COVID-19 has exacerbated the underbelly of the gaps in our society and failures of all of our institutions was very awakening to me. Rajiv, we must commend you for putting together that very informative presentation in such a short time, being the fact that the budget was just presented yesterday evening. Mr. Bharath, the need for the reset of this whole economy was, I think it should be a wake-up call to all. The need for technology in agriculture to incentivize young people to come into farming has been needed for a very long time now. Commander Garvin, Heerah, your perspective with respect to a shift to people-centered values and project governance approach, I don't think that applies to national security. I think that applies to all aspects of government. I mean, we need to have measurable approaches to how we are spending our money today. What are we getting from our dollar today? We're dipping into our savings, but we're not measuring our rewards from it. I would also like to thank Mr. Jason Williams for his expertise as our moderator. And most importantly, all the individuals who worked tirelessly and gave us their time and expertise to bring this event to a success. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would like to say that we are all most grateful to all our speakers on this budget forum. I'd like to share a riddle and the answer that I gave to the president of the Tunapuna Chamber, Melissa. Can you spell the word success, S-U-C-C-E-S-S, in 6 letters? And the answer is CHANGE. Change. Can't change, you will never achieve success. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for that, Mr. Rampersad. Also, we thank all the participants for coming on board, all the very important questions. Of course, the conversation will continue after we log out tonight, and you can indeed look into the chat room to find out and see where you can get this particular recording. Again, to everyone involved, thank you so much. And in the words of Dr. Attzs, I love that part where she said, we don't only live here, we must invest here. And I sincerely believe we must. I personally want to leave here better than the way I found it. And I want to leave a better foundation for my son, and hopefully he can do the same for his children to come. So thank you indeed. Great discussion, and we will indeed continue in our own capacity to try to be the change we want to see. Thanks again for having me, and I look forward, once there's Life, Health and Strength, we will do it again, hopefully next year. Have a great one, everyone. All the best.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, team.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.